In this video we're going to be looking at how alliances led to World War One. The learning intention is to investigate how the alliance system could have caused World War One. Success criteria is to identify the two major alliances, to describe why the alliances were made, and to explain how the alliances could have led to war. So we're going to look firstly at the different countries involved and see what their hopes and their fears were in 1914, which will explain what led to some of these alliances happening. So first of all, we've got Great Britain, which you can see on the map of Europe there, highlighted in red. Now, Britain had a large empire and a large navy to protect it. As you know, the empire spanned the globe over different continents. Because we're an island nation, needed a large navy to protect it. She also needed the Royal Navy to patrol the waters around Britain and a large merchant navy to import and export goods. So navy to protect Britain, protect the empire, and to bring in different goods. Britain, though, feared the expanding German navy and Germany's ambition of creating her own empire. So Britain are hoping to maintain their empire, whilst at the same time they are fearful of Germany's navy and their own ambitions. Next, we've got France, which is there in the green. France had already been at war with Germany and lost that war in the Franco-Prussian War. France had lost this war and by 1914 was extremely anti-German. In that war they lost some of their land to the German country. So they wanted to get that land back and redeem themselves for being defeated in 1877 and 71. France, though, did have a very strong economy and a fairly large army. As we found out last week, France was involved with Germany in an arms race to develop their army and doubled the size of their army during this period. Next, we've got Russia, the big orange one on the right side on the east of Europe. Russia was a huge country with a huge army, which was growing all the time. Russia wanted to secure warm water ports along the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, as her northern ports were frozen for part of the year. So due to its position, it had ports on the north coast, but that was a very, very cold region, so some parts of the year they were unusable. So they wanted to spread and take some ports more towards the south, which were warmer and in the Mediterranean, so they could access them throughout the year. Russia disliked Austria-Hungary, which was very, very close to the Russian Empire, and they were an ally of Serbia, one of Austria's neighbours, and an ally of Balkan countries. So Russia was a big defender of Balkan nations, and so they hoped to keep the Balkan countries free from Austria-Hungary. Germany. So Germany in the middle there in the blue. The German economy and industrial production was strong in 1914, so they had lots of money and they were producing lots of goods. The army was well trained and well equipped, and the navy was growing, so they were starting to become very, very powerful. As you remember from last week, involved in a naval race with Britain and an arms race with France, and were doing very well. Germany wanted her place in the sun and was keen to acquire more land abroad. So one thing that Germany wasn't happy about was the size of their empire compared to Britain and France in particular. Germany was particularly jealous of Britain's empire and naval power. So Germany want to expand, they want to grow. Lastly, we've got Austria-Hungary, there in the grey. So the Austrian Empire was large and included 11 different nationalities of people, so very diverse. Austria-Hungary was desperate to prevent their empire from collapsing, as some of those nationalities were demanding their independence. So a few weeks ago we looked at Bosnia and the events that happened there. Some of these countries are looking to become free from the empire. She also wanted to gain more land that bordered the Mediterranean. So Austria-Hungary is fearful that they are going to lose what empire they have, but on the other hand they're hopeful that they can continue to expand and grow. So those are some of the major players involved and some of their hopes and their fears. What I want you to do for task 1 is you are going to use this table to fill in what each country hoped for in 1914 and what each country feared. What I want you to do is pause the video now so you can answer those questions and fill in the table. Then once you're ready, you can press play and move on. So, here are some of the potential things you could have had in your table. So, Great Britain's hopes were to protect their empire and fears were the German navy and their ambition. Germany's hopes was to expand their empire and their fear was, well, of Britain. They were fearful and jealous of Britain's empire and navy. France, they hoped to reclaim the lost land and they feared Germany. They'd already been beaten by them once. Russia's hopes were to get warm water ports and protect the Balkans. Russia's fears were they disliked Austria, and Austria wanted to gain more land and were fearful that their empire could collapse. So those are some of the things you could have had in your table. So, task 2. What I want you to do, using that information, I would like you to explain in depth the question, how could these hopes and fears have contributed to the outbreak of war in 1914? So I'd like you to discuss how some of these hopes and fears of these different countries could have led to World War One. So make sure you're specific with which country you are mentioning and why their hope or fear could lead to a war. You don't need to write about all of them, but I'd like some depth to your answer, please. Again, pause the video, and once you are done, press play and ready to move on. So we're now going to look at the idea of alliances and what they are and how they came to be. So an alliance is when people or countries agree to join together to benefit each other. Usually when they do this, they have common interests or goals, so things that they want to do that are similar to the other country or people that they are allying themselves with. So an alliance is benefit for each party, both groups, for common interests. So, the alliances were made because, as we could see from earlier, there was little trust between these empires. So there was a lot of fear and a lot of distrust between these major empires. That led to them wanting to ally themselves up with other countries to make them stronger, to protect themselves. So Britain, France and Russia joined together to create the Triple Entente, Entente being an agreement. Germany, Austria-Hungary and Italy joined together to create the Triple Alliance. So we've got two different alliances there, Britain, France and Russia with the Triple Entente, Germany, Austria-Hungary and Italy with the Triple Alliance. So you can see here, this is a visual representation of the Triple Alliance, Austria-Hungary, Germany and Italy, which was formed in 1882, and they promised to defend each other if either were attacked. So if Italy was attacked, Austria-Hungary and Germany would help, and vice versa. That was the agreement made in 1882. So as you can see, they are nice and central and connected to each other. On the other hand, we have got the Triple Entente, which was formed in 1907. Now, the Triple Entente was different to the Triple Alliance because they didn't necessarily promise to help each other, but they sort of indicated that they would. Britain was a bit more hesitant, as we'll find out next week. They weren't connected, but as you can see, they've got the Triple Alliance surrounded. So, pros and cons there. They're not connected to each other, but they have got an advantageous position that they have both sides of the Triple Alliance. So, each of those will come into play as we move on. So what were the risks of these alliances though? Well, if two countries disagreed and went to war, that could draw in the others in the alliances. So instead of just having a war between, say, Italy and Russia, other countries would join, and then you've got a whole European war. That could very easily happen. These major powers were starting to feel vulnerable and threatened, which made them act more aggressively. So if you feel vulnerable, that's more likely to make you act out and aggressively. If you act aggressively, there's more chance of a war sparking. Lastly, countries were desperate to keep their allies happy, and so would help them if and when required. So these countries were pretty much saying, whatever happens, we are going to help you. This is particularly the case with Germany and Austria. Germany pretty much said to Austria, whatever happens, we will help you and defend you no matter what. And that will come into play later on. So there is a particular region that was very significant. We've mentioned them a couple of times in passing before, and this is the Balkans. So the Balkans is in the southeast of Europe, and the region includes countries such as Serbia and Bulgaria. So the southeastern part of the Austrian Empire was in the Balkan region. Bosnia is part of the Balkan region. The Russian Empire, though, felt like it should protect this region, as they had many cultural similarities. They had very similar cultures in Russia to the Balkans. Therefore, if any country started a war with a Balkan country, Russia would come to its defence and its aid. This could then result in Britain and France being brought into a war involved with the Balkan countries. So if a war is started on a Balkan country, this could lead to the whole of the Triple Entente joining in to help. As you can see on the right, there is a visual representation. You've got sort of a Venn diagram there. The yellow between the countries showing which countries would aid which countries have got treaties with each other, and which countries are allied, and the dates. So as you can see, there are countries on both the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente who have agreed to aid Balkan countries. So very, very the issues in that area are going to start bubbling up, as we saw last week, and it is definitely a problem area in 1914. So, how did these alliances actually cause World War I? Well, as you know from the other week, in June 1914, that should say 1914, sorry, the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated by a Serbian, Gavrilo Princip. Austria-Hungary was furious and threatened to invade Serbia. Previously, Germany had agreed to support Austria-Hungary no matter what, and so they agreed that they would help Austria if that's what they needed to attack Serbia. Germany, though, presumed that this would lead to a war with Russia, as Serbia was a Balkan country. So Germany knew that Russia were going to get involved. They also presumed that this would bring Britain and France into the war. And so what they decided to do was, rather than wait for Russia, France and Britain to declare war, Germany was going to strike first by invading France. And that's how World War I came to start, with Germany preemptively invading France, which we'll look into a little bit more next week. So, what you're going to do for your final task is you have some questions that I would like you to answer in full sentences and in depth, please. So, number 1, I'd like you to describe the 2 different alliances involved in 1914. So tell me the name and tell me which countries are involved in each. 2, I'd like you to explain why these alliances were created. 3, I would like you to explain how these alliance systems make war more likely. So, just hypothetically, not specifically to World War I. Explain how the assassination led to war in 1914 is your question 4. And then your extension is to explain why the Balkan region was at the centre of issues between these 2 alliances. So make sure you're writing in full sentences and you're explaining, so giving reasoning. Make sure you're giving specific details, not just saying this country, give specific countries. So, those are your final task questions. Once you have completed those questions, submit your work through Teams, and then you are done. Thank you for watching.